Good evening and welcome to I24 News Defense Magazine. I'm Alon Ben David with your weekly review of security, intelligence and strategic affairs. In this edition, Israel under a continuous terror attack with daily multiple strikes of lone wolf terrorists. What can be done to combat such assaults? We explore the role Israeli Arabs play in the current wave of events and take a look at how Turkey is dealing with the deadliest terror attack it undertook. The terror wave has entered its fourth week, spreading from Jerusalem and the West Bank to various locations inside Israel, while the West Bank shows a decline in violent clashes and Gaza remains mostly non-involved. Most attacks are carried out inside Israel. Before we begin, here are the images from recent events. And joining me now in the studio is Dr Erika, senior researcher at the Interdisciplinary Center at Tzlia and a leading expert on terrorism and guerrilla in modern times. Mr. Carmon, thank you very much for joining us. Help us. What are we witnessing here? A new intifada, a wave of terrorism that is going to pass? What is it?
Hello. I don't think it's an intifada. It's a wave of terrorism. It is a result of several factors. The strategic factors are the lack of negotiations or any future expectations for the Palestinian people on the one hand, but also, in my opinion, the results of the protective edge operation last year, which influences still a lot of young people in the West Bank, perhaps more than in Gaza itself. On this background, there are local events, especially I think the incitement of the Palestinian Authority before the discussions in the United Nations General Assembly and the speech by President Abu Mazen. They wanted to put the Jerusalem issue on the table and also the sensitivity of the Jewish holidays the last weeks.
But when you say a wave is something that comes, washes and passes away. You mean that it's going to go away?
We don't know, but if we take if you want, the historical perspective, to know if it's intifada, the first intifada, it took several months to understand it, and the second intifada, the same. If you look to the events or the terror between 1993, after Oslo agreement, until 1997, there were a lot of terror attacks, including suicide attacks, were not considered intifada.
But the frequency of events today makes us all feel that like we've entered a new situation, something different than what we've known.
The problem is that even those which want to stop it, part of the Palestinian Authority and part of the Arab leaders, because it is a very popular and very young, they have difficulty to stop it. So if there will not be big incidents or a lot of people that are killed, and I'm quite afraid, for instance, what happens today after the manifestations in Sachin here, that if there is no more people killed, I think this will not die, but it will be weakened by this kind of attempts to mitigate it by the leadership.
You mentioned the young people carrying out those attacks. So before we continue, it appears that more and more Palestinian women participate in violent confrontations and terror. Lorena Izo and Channel 2 Ohad Chemo try to explore this new trend in the following report.
On Monday, Beit El intersection was a center for violence like it has been every day this past week. Hundreds of young Palestinians, mostly students from Bir Zait, An-Najah, and Al-Quds universities, confront Israeli security forces, throwing stones and Molotov cocktails and fueling the fire of the protest.
Are you ready to take a stone and throw it on soldiers?
Of course.
Aren't you afraid?
No, it's my country. I have to defend it.
One of the special phenomena of this recent wave is the amount of women actively partaking in the protest. In demonstrations, direct confrontations, and in extreme cases, terrorists willing to stab or explode. They are mostly single and highly political. Some secular, some wear a hijab. They all demonstrate the impact the social protest in the Arab world has on women, pushing them forward to the center of the stage.
It's natural that women go out and participate in the protest. In the end, we have one homeland for both men and women. In the end, it's our homeland.
In what way do Palestinian women lead the events?
Women have various roles. Some throw stones, some protect the young, others provide food and water or help with wounded. If I have to throw a stone, I will not be ashamed of myself, because it was self-defense. It's my right to defend my people, my refugee camp, and my Jerusalem.
Social networks encourage women to step up, and women have become more dominant in terror attacks, with 3 stabbings and 1 attempted bombing attack carried out by women. While this new force can't be good for Israel, perhaps it can take comfort in the fact that street protests appear to be winding down.
Dr. Carmon, we've seen women taking part in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but it seems that the age is becoming very young. Yesterday, we saw a 16-year-old girl, a 13-year-old boy. What makes these kind of young people become terrorists?
Most of these people are influenced by social media, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and so on. And also because the grown-up people do not want to participate in these manifestations. By the way, the first and the second Intifada also began with very young people, if you remember. And women entered the second Intifada in a late stage. And by the way, we had a Fatah organization of women suicide bombers. So it's not a new phenomenon, but it is developing according to the events on the ground.
Dr. Carmon, thank you very much for coming to our studio.
Thank you.
The Arab population living in Israel is always closely affected by a wave of terror and violence. Recent events brings the divide within the population to light. I-24 News' Ayman Siksik has more.
A live dispute between 2 Israeli Arab leaders on national television has brought to the fore the perilous situation Arabs in Israel are facing. In light of the recent wave of terror attacks against Israelis, leader of the joint list of Arab parties, Ayman Odeh, was in Nazareth discussing racism and prejudice Arabs are facing during this time. But his live interview with the Evening News was cut short by no less than the mayor of the city. The live dispute followed weeks of intensifying tension within the Arab community in Israel. Last week, protests took place in the central Israeli city of Jaffa over the ongoing tension on Temple Mount.
This was not the fire of anger. This was only a spark. But the anger will come unless Israel addresses our needs and the need of the Palestinian people for freedom.
But this point may have been lost, as some Israeli commentators said the protests were a threat to Israelis. Purpose of the protest touched on a far bigger issue for Arab citizens of Israel, particularly the Muslim community, the status quo around the Al-Aqsa Mosque. According to the Israeli National Agency of Statistics, in 2012, there were 1.38 million Muslims living in Israel, an increase of 34,000 people over the previous year. 20% of all Muslims in Israel live in Jerusalem, the largest concentration in a single city.
This is not a demonstration of sympathy. We are not trying to sympathize with anyone. This is our cause, an Arab cause and a Muslim cause. And it's our duty to voice our objection to the actions of the Israeli government.
The question is, where does the Arab population in Israel go from here? Having elected a new political leader in a landmark election earlier this year, uniting all main Arab parties into one, the Arab population may now have to decide on electing a new way of making its voice heard.
To give give us a broader look into that issue as well as how it communicates with the forces and politics in the Palestinian Authority. We are joined now from Ramallah with I-24 News correspondent Muhammad Al-Aqsim. Hello, Muhammad.
Hello.
Standing north of Ramallah, I see some commotion behind you.
Yes, clashes are continuing here in Ramallah. We are standing close to the Beit El checkpoint on the eastern side of Ramallah. Clashes started after 2 o'clock this afternoon when Palestinian factions of all sides called to a day of rage in Ramallah. There were a short strike first and then demonstration close to the Kalandia checkpoint, and now the clashes moved here to this area, which has been for the last week. There have been clashes between Palestinian protesters, mainly young Palestinian men and women, some from the University of Birzeit, clashing with the Israeli army, using the same thing every day, same tactics. You have stone throwing, Molotov bombs, as well as burning tires, as you can see behind me, with the Israeli army using tear gas canisters and live bullets and rubber bullets at the same time.
But
just moments ago,
we are seeing
someone got
in
shot
the last
by a bullet and was taken to the hospital.
We are seeing in the last few days a constant decrease in the number of people that are going to those demonstrations and clashes with the military. How would you define the position of the Palestinian Authority vis-a-vis the lone wolf attacks inside Israel?
First of all, the Palestinian Authority is not in charge of these demonstrations. It wasn't from the beginning, and it's not up until this moment. The Palestinian Authority is keeping a good distance between it and these demonstrators. They are trying to hold the stick, as they say, from the middle. They don't want to look like they're preventing the protesters from coming out, but at the same time they don't want to look to the international community and to the Israeli government and to the Arab world that they are someone who is pushing or wanting to escalate this wave of violence. We don't see any police, Palestinian police in this area. We don't hear publicly, at least, that the Palestinian Authority is trying to prevent and stop these demonstrations. Of course, you're right. The number has decreased from, say, last Friday. We were here last Friday and the clashes were very fierce, as well as Saturday. The number of protesters has come down, but I tell you what, one thing, it's not sometimes it's not how many, but it's about how intense the clashes are, and they can be. I think if these clashes continue on for another week or so, it may escalate. But at this point, the Palestinian Authority is hoping that it will die off and die down with time.
But I'm trying to find out what is the Palestinian position vis-a-vis those attacks being carried out inside Israel. We've seen the Palestinian Authority releasing some ads praising those shaheeds that took part in those attacks. What is their position?
Well, you can say either their position is neutral, which is officially they're not saying anything, or they're trying, their main official statement is they're trying to say we are okay with popular peaceful uprising, but we are, of course, against any carrying arms or committing any operations, whether it's knives or weapons. So officially, their position has been the same. They're not for an armed uprising, but they are okay with protesters coming out and chanting and even throwing stones. Throwing stones here in the, for the Palestinians isn't a weapon. They say that this is another form of peaceful protest. So the Palestinian Authority's position is, like I said, it's either neutral, which isn't saying a whole lot, but also officially they're saying that we don't call for using weapons for these protests.
Muhammad Al-Aqsim, thank you very much in Ramallah. Please take care of yourself. Turkey is another country undergoing internal frictions following the country's worst terror attack ever, with nearly 100 casualties in Ankara on Saturday. Members of the Kurdish minority blame the government, whereas the government believes 2 male suicide bombers caused the explosions, and Turkish Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu pointed a finger at the Islamic State terror group as the prime suspect for the bombing. So far, no group took responsibility for the attack. We are joined now by the journalist Laura Walls from Istanbul. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
As far as you know, who committed the deadly terror attack in Ankara Saturday?
According to the Prime Minister, there are 2 suicide bombers whose remains are with the Forensic Medical Institute. They have run DNA on them. Turkish press is saying that they do know the identities at this time. Also, the Prime Minister on Monday said that they were focusing on ISIS as the main culprit of this deadly, deadly attack, actually Turkey's deadliest terrorist attack in its history since the early 20th century. And now we know that it's killed a minimum of 102 people because there have been autopsies on 102 bodies. Although the pro-Kurdish HDP party has said that 128 have perished.
Where does Turkey really stand against ISIS?
Well, Turkey has hit ISIS targets in Syria at least once, and it is now part of the international U.S.-led coalition against ISIS. But most of that is with the use of the Incirlik air base, the U.S. air base in Turkey. Finally, the Turks allowed the United States to use it for their strikes in Syria. Both the Prime Minister and President have spoken many times about ISIS and the Kurds, but they said both are terrorist groups. And they also said that PKK is a more pressing terrorist group for Turkey. That's why you've seen so many airstrikes on PKK and relatively few on ISIS. Certainly, PKK and ISIS have been the most formidable foes to each other in Syria. So we just don't know whether Turkey is going to really crack down on ISIS after this horrific terrorist attack or not remains to be seen. But certainly the Turkish public would like to see a crackdown. Even in early 2015, there were police reports there were ISIS cells around Turkey, that they would be trying to perpetrate attacks, especially on foreign groups. So this is very worrying, and it's a really real danger in Turkey. People are afraid. One woman in Istanbul said she believes there's an ISIS recruitment center in her neighborhood still. So many Turkish citizens are hoping that the government gets tough on ISIS, if not in Syria, then at least on Turkish soil.
Laura Wells in Istanbul, thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you.
And that's all we have time for. Be sure to visit us again next week for another edition of I24 News Defense. For all the latest headlines, log on to www.i24news.tv. Have a safe and peaceful night from the Jaffa Port.